The smoky bypassed La Torrena.
It was a very warm. The sun above the sky that was blue and tremendous and beckoning to birds ever on the wing, shone bright as if determined to scorch everything under heaven. Even the low square nipa house that stood in ashamed reliefs against the gray-green haze of grass and leaves. It was a lonely dwelling located far from each neighbor, which were huddled close to one another, as if for mutual comfort. It was flanked on the both sides by tall, slender bamboo tree, which rustled plaintively under a gentle wind. On the porch, a woman past her early twenties stood, regarding the scene before with eyes made, incurious by its familiarity. All around her, the land spread endlessly in seams and vanished into the distance. There were dark, newly plowed furrows, where in the due-time timorous seedling will give rise to sturdy stalk and golden grain to a rippling yellow sea, the wind and the sun during the harvest time. Promise of plenty, reward for hard toil with a sign of discontent. However, the woman turned enter a small dining room where a man sat over a belated midday meal.
Pedro Buhay, a prosperous farmer, looked up from his plate and smiled at his wife as she stood framed by the doorway, the sunlight glinting on her dark hair, which was drawn back without relenting wave from a rather prominent and austere brow. "Where are the shirts I ironed yesterday?" she asked, as she approached the table. "In my trunk, I think," he answered. "Some of them need darning," and observing the empty plate, she added, "Do you want some more rice?" "No," hastily. "I am in a hurry to get back. We must finish plowing the south field today, because tomorrow is Sunday." Pedro pushed the chair back and stood up. Soledad began to pile the dirty dishes, one on top of the other. "Here is the key to my trunk." From the pocket of his khaki coat, he pulled a string of nondescript red, which held together a big shiny key and another small, rather rusty-looking one.
With deliberate care, he untied a knot and, detaching the big key, dropped the small one back into his pocket. She watched him fixedly as he did this. The smile left her face and a strange look came into her eyes as she took the big key from him without a word. Together, they left the dining room. Out of the porch, he put an arm around her shoulders and peered into her shadowed face. "You look pale and tired," he remarked softly. "What have you been doing all morning?" "Nothing," she said listlessly, "but the heat gives me a headache." "Then lie down and try to sleep while I am gone." For a moment, they looked deep into each other's eyes. "It is really warm," he continued. "I think I will take off my coat." He removed the garment absent-mindedly and hung it to her. The stairs creaked under his weight as he went down. "Choleng!" He turned his head as he opened the gate. "I shall pass by Tia Maria's house and tell her to come. I may not return before dark."
Soledad nodded. Her eyes followed her husband down the road, nothing to find set his head and shoulders. The case of his stride, a strange ache rose in her throat. She looked at the coat he had handed to her. It exuded a faint of smell of his favorite cigars, one of which invariable smoke after the day's work on his way home from the field. Mechanically, she began to fold the garment. As she was doing so, a small object fell from the floor with a dull, metallic sound. Soledad stopped down to pick it up. It was the small key. She started in her palm, as if she had never seen it before. Her mouth was tightly drawn. For a while she looked almost old. She fastened the small bedroom to the coat carelessly on the back of a chair. She opened the window, and the early afternoon sunshine flooded in. On a mat spread on the bamboo floor were some newly washed garments. She began to fold them one by one in feverish haste, as if seeking the task of the moment, in the refuge from painful thoughts. But her eyes moved restlessly around the room, until they rested almost furtively on a small trunk that was half concealed by a rolled mat into the dark corner.
It was a small old trunk, without anything on the outside, that might arouse one's curiosity, but it held the things she had come to hate with unreasoning violence, the things that were causing her so much unnecessary anguish and pain, and threatening to destroy all that was most beautiful between her and her husband. Soledad came across a torn garment. She tightened a needle, but a few minutes uneven stitches, she picked her finger in a crimson drop stain, the white garment. Then she saw she had been mending on the wrong side. "What is the matter with me?" she asked herself, aloud as a pull that creaked with nervous and impatient fingers. What did it matter if her husband could just keep the clothes of his first wife? "She is dead anyhow. She is dead," she repeated to herself over and over and again. The sound of her voice calmed her. She tried to treat the needle once more, but she could not. Not for that years had come, unbeaten and completely blinded her.
"My God," she cried with a sob. "Make me forget in this face," as he put the small key back in his pocket. She brushed her tears with the sleeve of her camisa and abruptly stood up. The heat was stifling, and the silence in the house was beginning to be unendurable. She looked out of the window. She wondered what was keeping Tia Maria. Perhaps Pedro had forgotten to pass by her house in his hurry. She could picture him out there in the south field gazing far and aware at the newly plowed land, with no thought in his mind but of work, work. For the people of the valley whose patron saint, San Isidro Labrador, smiled on them with benign eyes from his crude altar in the little chapel up the hill. This season was a prolonged hour, during which they were blind and dead to everything but the demands of the land. During the next half hour, Soledad wandered in and out of the rooms in an effort to seek escape from her own thoughts and to fight down an overpowering impulse. If Tia Maria would only come and talk to her to divert her thoughts to the other channels.
But the expression on her husband's face as he put the smoky back into his pocket kept torturing her like a nightmare, goading beyond endurance. Then, with all resistance to the impulse gone, she was kneeling before the small trunk. With a long drawn breath, she inserted the smoky. There was an unpleasant metallic sound, for the key had not been used for a long time and it was rusty. That evening, Pedro Buhay hurried home with the usual cigar dangling from his mouth, pleased with himself and the tenants because the work in the south field had been finished. Tia Maria met him at the gate and told him that Soledad was in bed with a fever. "I shall go to town and bring Dr. Santos," he decided, his cool hand on his wife's brows. Soledad opened her eyes. "Don't, Indo," she begged with a vague terror in her eyes, which she took for anxiety for him because the town was pretty far and the road was dark, deserted by that hour of the night. "I shall be all right tomorrow."
Pedro returned an hour later, very tired and very worried. The doctor was not at home, but his wife has promised to give him Pedro's message as soon as he came in. Tia Maria decided to remain for the night, but it was Pedro who stayed up to watch the sick women. He was puzzled and worried, more than he cared to admit it. It was true that Soledad did not look very well early that afternoon. Yet, he thought the fever was rather sudden. He was afraid it might be a symptom of a serious illness. Soledad was restless the whole night. She tossed from one side to another, but toward morning she fell into some sort of troubled sleep.
Pedro then lay down to snatch up a new wings. He woke up to find soft morning sunshine streaming through the half-open window. He got up without making any noise. His wife was still asleep and now breathing evenly. A sudden rush of tenderness came over at the sight of her so slight, so frail.
Tia Maria was nowhere to be seen, but that did not bother him, for it was Sunday and the work in the Southfield was finished. However, he missed the pleasant aroma which came from the kitchen every time he had awake early in the morning. The kitchen was neat but cheerless, and an immediate search for food brought no results. So, shouldering an axe, Pedro descended the rickety stairs that led to the backyard. The morning was clear and the breeze so soft and cool. Pedro took in a deep breath of air. It was good. It smells of trees, of the rice field, of the land he loved. He found out a pile of logs under the young mango tree near the house, and began to chop. He swung the axe and the rapid clean sweeps, enjoying the feel of the smooth wooden handle in his palms. As he stopped for a while to mop his brow, his eyes caught the remnants of smudge that had been built in the backyard.
Ah, he muttered to himself. She swept the yard yesterday. After I left here, that coupled with the heat must have given her a headache. And then the fever. The morning breeze stirred the ash, and a piece of white clothes fluttered into view. Pedro dropped his axe. It was a half-burned pañuelo. Somebody had been burned clothes. He examined the slightly ruined garment closely. A puzzled expression came into his eyes. First it was doubt, groping for truth, then amazement, and finally agonized. Incredulity passed across his face. He almost ran back to the house. In 3 strides, he was upstairs. He found his coat hanging from the back of chair. Cautiously, he entered the room. The heavy breathing of his wife told him that he was still asleep. As he stood by the small trunk, a bad distance to open it assailed to him. Surely he must be mistaken. She could not have done it. She could not have been that foolish.
Resolutely, he opened the trunk. It was empty. It was nearly noon when the doctor arrived. He felt Soledad's pulse and asked questions, which she answered in monosyllables. Pedro stood by listening to the whole procedure, with an inscrutable expression on his face. He had the same expression when the doctor told him that nothing was really wrong with his wife, although she seemed to be worried about something. The physician merely prescribed a day of complete rest. Pedro lingered on the porch after the doctor left. He was trying not to be angry with his wife. He hoped it would be just an interlude that could be recalled without bitterness. She would explain sooner or later. She would be repentant. Perhaps she would even listen and eventually forgive her, for she was young and he loved her. But somehow, he knew that this incident would always remain a shadow in their lives.